Hey guys, I just want to go over my top 40 albums today. These may not be yours, they are, in fact, my favorites. You can put your favorites down below. I kind of kept expanding from 25, and it became like 40 anyway. And, well, the site I use luckily has like its lowest base is 40 anyway, so it looked kind of prettier when I saved the entire thing. So anyway, I'll go over each one as they come. I didn't really have a great way of doing this, but I guess just I think this is the best way here. Here we go, back to the main screen. At number 40, it's going to be Strikes Twice by Larry Carlton. Now, Larry Carlton is one of those really good, like, jazz rock fusion players from the 70s. He was, I believe he was originally a smooth jazz kind of guy, and he also saw some work with Steely Dan, including a solo on one of their hit singles, Kid Charlemagne, which is a total bop, and you should listen to his solo on that. It's pretty exotic for like I'd still call that probably a rock song. Maybe a little jazzy funk vibe here and there, but for the time, his solo was really out there for a when did that album come out? That was 1976, I believe. And unless you were looking like outside of the fusion hemisphere, like if you were looking outside of the fusion hemisphere, you wouldn't really find crazy solos like that. It was really kind of like something you didn't see too often outside of the fusion genre when you saw like McLaughlin or just even in like more like horn oriented settings with like Herbie and whatnot. So it's really crazy to see in like the more top 40 mainstream. And number 39, I have The Pillows, Living Field. This album came out in 1995. These guys are a big like Japanese alternative rock band. They did they had like some success in with like getting these albums like really well known through the anime community through a show called Fully Coolly I think Fully Coolly Slice of Life. But anyway, they had this album Happy Bivouac that really hit the spotlight in the anime community when it came out. Anyway, that album has very tasty kind of like lead guitar licks, and it's a little jazzy and melancholy here and there. It's very kind of like if alternative and like soft jazz had kind of like a mingling. So that's what I got at 39. 38 is the Urban Grooves, Down to the Bone. This is a really good like jam jazz funk album. The drumming on it is pretty insane. I think it came out in 98, 99. This is a really good British band. Highly recommend it if you really like jammy kind of like keyboards, horns, drums. It's just kind of it gets really jammy and it's great to listen to. Number 37 is City Kids by Spyro Gyra. I think this came out in '83. These guys are from Buffalo, New York. They they are pretty a pretty renowned group actually. They are all instrumental. They came out in the late '70s during the disco era. So it's like a really odd time you were when they were kind of going into that '80s hemisphere, and they were a big spotlight of the fusion scene with the Yellow Jackets, and Tribal Tech, and other '80s fusion acts. These are also very jammy. I'd consider them to be, if you compare them to Down to the Bone, I'd consider these guys to be a bit more closely related to Weather Report, where a lot of them are virtuistic instead of jammy, but they do have like some Eastern influences that meld with the American jazz, blues, funk that they kind of have going on there. That soft jazz fusion kind of sound. So they're really awesome. They have albums and albums for days, but that's my favorite one from them. And then number 36 is the Ultra Zone. Now this actually fell way down than I was expecting. But this is a great album from Steve Vai. He has a title track called Frank in this one. That's a homage to Frank Zappa, who nearly made the list. He nearly made the list, but yeah, Frank's stuff can be really out there and it can be really fun at the same time. So he didn't quite make it. He didn't even get the honorable, but it's still one of the smartest artists I've ever like heard speak. Anyway, back on Steve. This album also has a song called Ooh, where it just goes like bam 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 ooh, and I always thought that track was really clever, and I always really thought this was his more kind of artistic work without getting too alien and exotic. Well, he still is alien here, but it's really hits a lot of like points where it's like you can probably show it to a more casual listener. All right. And at number 35, I got Congratulations on Your Loss by Father Figure. Uh, Another band from New York. These guys are really influenced from like that '70s prog and like fusion kind of era. These guys are really underground, but this album in general kind of like was one of the couple next to like Hiromi and Miles Davis, Snarky Puppy, Mahavishnu that really got me into that fusion sound. Their fifth song called Suns has a really cool saxophone solo in the middle that kind of ascends the mix. It builds up and builds and builds. And it's a very psychedelic and proggy track. And it kind of just really honed me into their kind of like very proggy fusion Mahavishnu influence kind of like sound, except mixed with modern prog, which really was alluring to me at the time. And at number 34, Californication. Now, this album is very stadium rock and funk rock, and I was a big Anthony Kiedis fan, and still am. And Red Hot Chili Peppers is probably like one of the bands that I still really, really like. John Frusciante did influence me a lot growing up and playing guitar, and even before playing guitar, I was into them, and just like I think By the Way or Blood Sugar Sex Magic was my first Red Hot Chili Peppers album, and it just I think it was By the Way actually, and it just like it blew me away. And Californication years later, I listened to that, and just like just Frusciante coming out from the dead and laying that kind of like juicy guitar work, just like the way that he just his lead work, and just like the synchronicity between the four with Chad Smith and Anthony and Flea was just it had all these psychedelic elements that they started to toy with a lot more when he came back, and just the way it was mixed and just the way it was received, and their chemistry was the best on this album. I think it's like, I honestly think it's the best like modern rock album to this day. And where am I? Number 33 is Pantera. I think this one's Cowboys from Hell. Now, I think there's like a lot that's just been said about Dimebag. Dimebag was buried with Eddie Van Halen's Frankentrap, and he was a huge Eddie fan, and they were actually like before they had their whole like groove metal aesthetic that really slimy kind of like garage kind of like grit. They were a hair metal band, I believe, and just the turning point for this one, and just like his like overall Dimebag's overall grit and the sludgy bass work, it's just like one of the coolest like metal albums. Like no matter like how like casual or hardcore, or like even if you're not a fan of that kind of sound, it's like one of the most like distinct and cool metal albums. And I'd say like even like the I'd say the bass work on here, just the way it hooks you in comparison to other like metal albums, is just really groovy, yeah, of course. And it's just like it nails a lot of needs as far as how like compositions and albums are just pieced together, because while while it can hook you in with other metal albums, is very guitar kind of hooked all the way, linked in all the way through. Like it's like the highlight beaming in the mix kind of sound. This one kind of like deviates from that, I think, even though like Dimebag's very apparent. And let's see, number 32, Ill Communication. This is a really great BC Boys album. Always really liked how they mix like punk with hip hop with like psychedelic kind of influences, and they also had some kind of psychedelic tracks. One of which I forget which one was on here. I think it was Sabrosa. Might have been Sabrosa or Shambhala, which are really like Eastern influence, very Eastern influenced jam kind of bassy tracks, very desertish feeling, very Eastern, so very how do I put it? Very cultured, I think. It's a little folky in a way. So I really liked how they did that. They were a three-piece, and they started in the early 80s, and they kind of were a little ahead of their time. I kind of wish they did more of the psychedelic stuff, but like, it's hard to rock on them with like all that they could do. And where am I? 31. That's Houses of the Holy, Led Zeppelin. This was like, I know like a lot of people will be ragging and be like, no, Led Zeppelin 2, no, Physical Graffiti. But I thought there was some like kind of like weaker tracks on those here and there, more so than Houses of the Holy. Houses of the Holy has the Rain song, which is really interesting because like Page tunes to like open G, I think, but tunes the B up to a C, and you get this really lush and crisp kind of sounding mellow guitar that's very serenading, very lush. You have the Ocean song, which is bam bam ba which I think is like, as far as how like John Bonham's just like blown away with how like caged and like precise he can be. It's a great track from him. And let's see. Number 30, we got The Adventures of Bumblefoot. This one is by Bumblefoot. This album is super, super weird if you don't really listen to a lot of guitar music. I thought Bumblefoot really nailed just the entire like creative approach here, and it was always like really like, if you compared it to the Ultrazone, he'd be actually a little more neurocentric and is like a little more groovy. So I compared the two a bit. Bumblefoot, I'd say, is like a bit more. There's like a lot more weird sounds. Like he fills with a lot more highs and buys a lot more wahs. Number 29 is Time Control by Hiromi Uahara, or Hiromi Sonic Bloom. This one is one of the big, like, non-guitar albums that really got me thinking in a different range. There's a lot of, like, chill out kind of tracks, like Time Out, which is really kind of, it suspends itself at points, and I don't know, it's just a really, really different album. It features Dave Fusinski, who is actually one of the professors at Berkeley. He plays microtonal guitars, which is a very different, very, very fusion-y choice, actually, and not very conventional. So that album's really awesome. And where am I? 28, Kairi Kobayashi. This has a really groovy kind of sax fusion. It's a little on the smooth jazz side. And I've been noticing that I've been saying soft jazz this entire time, but you know, same thing, right? So yeah, it's very groovy, but it's tight. It's very a little bassy and kind of like tropical jazz fusion kind of style. Has some guitar here and there in it. Yeah, I guess that's the way it's summarized. Mobo, number 27, Mobo by Kazumi Watanabe. This is a really very kind of samurai sounding jazz fusion album from, I want to say it's 84. This is almost like in the middle of that like kind of new wave era that America was also going through, but Japan was also like going through it, and I'd kind of like say put like Japan in like a 5 to 10 years behind kind of figuring out what America was doing, and they kind of adopted it once the 70s came in. So yeah, he's something else. And number 26 is Jamiroquai, The Return of the Space Cowboy. Okay, this is one of the most interlocked bass and keyboard like albums like ever. Very dancey, funky, acid jazz, tight, and JK, whatever his name is, has some soaring, smooth vocals. One of the best funk, acid jazz kind of albums you'll ever like hear. This one came out in 94, 95, I think. Might have been even 93, I'm forgetting. Spitballing. And number 24, Caravanserai. This one is by Carlos Santana. And he had, what's his name? Guy from Journey on it. Very good psychedelic kind of Latin rock outing. Some of the best percussion and lead guitar work you'll ever hear from, especially so early on. This one came out in about 71, 72, I'm gonna say. And it's kind of a very tranquil experience that's you kind of want to miss out on. So I very highly recommend that album. For its time is crazy. Oh, man, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name at the moment. But yeah, Journey's guitarist, yeah, I mean, he's on it. Like he was on his early work and joined his band, Carlos Santana's band, when he was like 15, and he's just incredible. Number 23 is Fair Warning by Van Halen. This was one of the big oddball Van Halen albums where people will be like, why do you pick 84 or self-titled? And there's a reason why. This is like, as far as like Eddie's like brainchild, this is it. This is the one. Otherwise, I like Roth definitely made the band more like poppy kind of rock and, well, maybe more so rock and roll ish in the like 50s, 60s reckless vibe. And Eddie kind of just wanted to experiment more. I mean, like, honestly, if Eddie like kind of like went solo, he probably would have become a vibe. But he likes, I guess at the same time he liked what he was doing. But Van Halen was just like a big drama filled band. One to check out on this one is Push Comes to Shove. As a very mean bass line is swanky, kind of like slower and dark sounding. And one called This Is Love, which is very upbeat and all kind of the same feel. It's kind of slower and groovy, but like it's more bright sounding, probably Ionian or something. Next one, 22. Observations by Mezzoforte. This has a really good vocal harmony, saxophone, bass. Like, this is a band from Iceland. This album came out in like 1983. It's very unique for the jazz rock, jazz fusion era of the time, and I highly recommend it. And number 21 is The Royal Scam. Now, this one has that solo I was talking about earlier on, as the Larry Carlton solo on Kids Charlemagne. And this overall is just a solid banger of a 70s album. I wouldn't say any of the albums is quite as groovy as this one. Their session musicians were top key. I forget if he was on this one or not, but Bernard Purdy was the sick studio drummer. I think it was Chuck Rainey's the other guy. It was a sick like bassist that was. Those two were on a lot of their albums throughout the 70s. And as far as like a rhythm section, you just could not get any better after them. Also Walter Becker and what's his name? Donald's. Man, almost had it, but yeah, Walter Becker and Donald were just like a big like duo that you couldn't stop in the 70s. Probably were like the best like writers, but best songwriting duo of the 70s, and that album was just groovy, funky, eccentric, and just like honest, like studio album magic that you just can't beat. And where was I? Number 20, Marty Friedman, Dragon's Kiss. This was kind of the peak of the metal, like, virtuoso movement. Marty Friedman was like in the band called Cacophony, called Taco. Yeah, I feel like I'm definitely not saying that right. Anyway, he was in this speed metal band called Cacophony. I think that's right. With Jason Becker in from like 85 to 88, might have been even 86 to 88. And it was like, as far as bands featuring like two monumental guitars, I don't think there's been a band that's had like so much like guitar talent in it before as that. And then he went on to record with Megadeth, and we all know about Tornado of Souls. Marty had like a big influence on like Japanese culture in him, and this album just has really like exotic kind of like folky world elements in it, and I definitely recommend it as far as that late 80s, early 90s sound. It's a unique one. Very true to how it looks and feels. I think the last two tracks are the big ones. I'm forgetting what they're called at the moment. Number 19, Back to Oakland. Okay, Tower of Power had, for a while, like, they had, like, the very best horn section in the world. They were so good that I've dug up different, like, artists from like around the world at the same time. Like, the big one was Japan, but I wouldn't be surprised if they recorded with other bands in like France or Italy or England, etc. Brazil, And like I did like I listened to a lot of Japanese artists from that same era. And I noticed like a lot of their horn members recorded on some of those like Japanese fusion albums from the 70s, and I was just like, what? So that really goes to show you how monstrous they can be. Bruce, their guitarist, had one of the tightest pockets of that era, a very funky soul. And their bassist, God, I'm forgetting his name at the moment. I was gonna write a script for this, but then I was like, could have helped though. It could have helped. And anyway, he died last year. He's like one of the best basses you'll ever hear, which I guess goes to show you how good that horn section is and how good he is at bass. All right, number 18, Out of a Crown. All right, so Alan Holdsworth is like a big like fusion guitarist from the 70s. He used to be in this band called Soft Machine, and he also recorded with the Tony Williams Lifetime, recording Protocosmos, the one really big track from the 70s you'll have to check out. Tony Williams was a big like fusion drummer, so you probably know how that goes. Anyway, Holdsworth was very, very, very unconventional from the rest of his 70s peers. Even, I call him like the, I think he's the best with kind of legato. Like, you won't find a better, like, a more smoother left-handed guitarist from that era. He's like even more alien than Vi or most guitarists I've seen. This one, it grows on you. It's very somber and alone sounding. It's one you'd kind of not go to a party over. It's kind of the reclusive track. And Alan Holdsworth was also a scientist. I think he was a chemist or something on his like spare time, and he kind of just like he was really like so far off from his peers that his albums didn't sell well. He was treated poorly by the media. He was like really very, very humble dude. Because of this, he did have kind of like a big, big, big drinking fix. Like this album kind of will get to you. I guess like maybe you could compare it to I guess Soft Machine and Caravan are the big two. If you listen to a little Radiohead's kind of has the vibe he has, but I wouldn't say it's the same style, but it's kind of that alienation, kind of accused by the world kind of feel. Number 17, Change of Generation by Unlucky Morpheus. This is a really cool band, a really cool power metal band from Japan. Their guitarist, forgetting his name at the moment, started off with just the vocalist. She's a female vocalist, very soaring. Forgetting her name too at the moment. Think it might have been Jill. No, Jill's the violinist. And for about like 6-7 years, they just ran as a two-piece, and the guitarist, he programmed drums, he had the bass, the rhythm guitars, lead guitars programmed out, and then they became the whole deal. They found the rest of the group. And as far as like metal bands, this is one of the most unique albums. Like, just like having that violin, two guitars, lead female vocals, and drums. It's a very quintessential modern metal album. I definitely recommend it. Where am I on this? 16. Kingdom of the Sun. A very virtuosic like metal girl. She's like big, largely influenced by like Dream Theater, Marty Friedman, Meshuggah, Lamb of God, all that. Very okay. This girl is very, very much proggy metal, kind of chimey metal, in your face kind of vibes. And she's been like on her solo career ever since I think it was that album. Anyway, she has style for days. Number 16, Henri. Cool. Alright, this is kind of like a mirror between the two. Like, kind of the new wave of, like, Madonna and, who's the other band? Anyway, Henri's like, a very kind of like funky pop album with like a lot of love and party songs. Toshiki Kadomatsu, who will be talked about like later on in this, was the producer for this, and he performed like a lot of the guitar, produced it, arranged it. So he's kind of the brainchild of her first like 6 albums, and it's really boppy, and you can compare it to like Michael Jackson kind of too. Like, it's really got that party love song vibe and chill out vibe. Number 15, Dragon King, Osamu Kitajima. This is a very folky kind of Shamisen like driven album. Has a lot of swagger in it, and it's like very festive, and I definitely recommend it for whoever like wants kind of a very, very different approach to what they usually like listen to. Number 14, Superflight, Casiopea. Alright, so a lot of Japanese fans of fusion know about this band. They are kind of the, I'd say maybe a little bit, they're kind of like Spyro Gyra, well, with a little more game, a lot more swagger. Their guitarist produced, or wait, was this the guy from the Square, or was it him? Anyway, either way, he, I forget if it was the Square. Anyway, his name is Issei Nora, and I am going to check this, because I think it was the guitarist of the Square that actually did so. Yeah, the guy from the Square was the creator of the Gran Turismo soundtracks. Right. Anyway, Issei Noro has done work with the Square, with Masahiro Ando, and, well, they're kind of like the quintessential fusion guitarists of Japan, as to, you could compare how like big they are with Alan Holdsworth and John McLaughlin as kind of the center point and the example of like virtuosity over in like Japan. And let's see, number 13, Alone, Toshiki Kadomatsu. These are very jammy fusion tracks. He simplifies things a lot more, so I think he's a lot more groovy oriented, but it's still very guitar driven. And he also had the same guitarist as a few others in this list, or no, same bassist. Tomohiko Ando, I think it was. Yeah, is the bassist, and he's like the horn players of Tower of Power. He's been on like, let's see, 3, 4, I would say 5 or 6 of these albums, I think, if memory serves right. But yeah, he's a powerhouse. So I'd call Takanaka kind of like the I kind of feel like he's the Greg Howe of Japan. He's very groovy oriented, very fusiony, but it's still very fun. And while he might not be as erotic as Greg Howe, he still catches you. Number 12, All in All. Okay. This is has some of the best rhythm guitar playing I've ever heard. Like, Al McKay, so groovy, and just like the brothers, what was the last name? But yeah, the bass playing is just like out of this world on this album. I think it was Maurice Jackson, actually. Yeah, Maurice White and Verdine White. See, it's hard to remember all these names, man. Should have wrote a script. Anyway, they have some of the best horns. Also, they have one of the best rhythm guitars you will ever hear. I guess the one lame thing about all these funk albums is the guitar work when they try to do a bunch of leads isn't quite as exhilarating or impressive as like stuff you'll find on like a fusion or a metal album. But yeah, it's still like for a soul funk band from the 70s, I think they're one of the like largest, biggest bands to like ever do it. Number 11, Birds of Fire. Okay, G. Lewis and Buddy Rich are the other guys besides McLaughlin I'd like to share here. Bass playing is also really good, but the violinist and the drummer are just top notch. Okay, they really, really kind of like pick up on this whole Eastern influence that George Harrison kind of like brought over here. And McLaughlin has one of the best kind of like right hand alternate picking like techniques of like all time. He's one of the big like 70s British examples of fusion that kind of just like knocks it home. And if I said US earlier, I probably was not thinking because these guys are British. Number 10, Prism. Okay, Prism also is kind of like alone in a way, but it's also a little bit psychedelic feeling. It's one of the best fusion bands from that era that I'd compare to. Man, I don't think I can compare them to anybody. Maybe if Pink Floyd and Genesis had like a kid or something like that. Yeah, anyway, this is a late 1970s album, and you'd really enjoy it. It's very adventurous. Number 9, Jeff Beck, Wired. Okay, so here's like a drummer, I think it's Nananda Williams. Anyway, he was also on like the album. He was on like some more like later stuff after Birds of Fire, Visions from the Emerald Beyond. That's it. And yeah, Billy Cobham had left the band, and then he came into the spotlight, and not long after that, he went over to Jeff Beck, and this is partially why Blow by Blow and Wired work so well, is because like Jeff Beck was kind of going for a groovy kind of jazz rock fusion, and Nando was just a lot more exotic Eastern influence. So it just is one of the best guitarist drummer kind of duos I've ever really heard. It is, if you're a guitarist or a drummer, it's one album you don't want to miss out on. It is crazy that that was recorded in 1976. Number 8, Akiko, Navigatoria. Alright, so this lady also recorded the Shadow Hearts games. She was the composer for them. This is very, very folky, traditional. I guess I'd say it's more explorative and kind of low-key, mid-key in comparison to Osamu Kitajima's Dragon King. So if you like the more low-key, kind of mellow, but still explorative, folky, new age sound, I definitely recommend this album. Number 7, Funky Stuff. Alright, so I pretty much consider this guy, Hiro Inagaki, to be a brilliant saxophonist, and I'd call this kind of like, I'd call this the Herbie Hancock of Japan. This dude's brilliant. Very, very groove-oriented jazz funk. And it's definitely worth a listen. Has a little bit of psychedelic influence in it. Definitely check it out. Number 6, Introspection, Greg Howe. Okay, Greg Howe's economy picking, just his overall excitement and exotic leads are just some of the best I've ever heard. And I definitely recommend checking out this album. Number 5, Snarky Puppy. The world is getting smaller. This one had a little bit more psychedelic kind of influence. It's very fusiony too. This one's the more guitar oriented album, which is why I chose this one out of all the Snarky Puppy albums. But I consider Ground Up to be a very close number 2. Number 4, Manchild, Herbie Hancock. Just re-explore what I said for funky stuff. It's the same thing, that jazz funky with a little psychedelic vibe. Number 3, Legacy of You, Toshiki Kadomatsu. Okay, Tomohiko Aoki was banger on this, and See Is a Lady, and just any Henri or Toshiki Kadomatsu album with him on it just was a total banger. This one also has some really neat synth sounds. The guitar leads are brilliant. Just like how explorative this album is phenomenal. I could listen to it time and time again and not really ever actually get tired of it. And if it wasn't for the next album I'm going to talk about coming up, it would be like probably the number 1 guitar virtuoso album. This, while he doesn't like stack up to guys like big guys like Friedman, he has a lot more style, I think, than Greg Howe or Marty Friedman or any of those guys. So I just considered Kadomatsu to be like one of my gods. He's amazing, and you should listen to Toshiki Kadomatsu. The dude, like, just like the albums he produced for Henri, his solo albums, the jazz funk and the jazz fusion albums. I don't know many like better artists. And okay. Man. Yeah, that album kicks ass. And the next one is Takashi Matsuzaki. I actually just I came across this like 2 weeks ago. He's actually in the band Dimension, which I found out about years ago. But this album has, I think it has kind of the same personnel. And man, the title track speaks, Get to the Party, and just like Julie has a lot of funky fusion vibe, electronic, kind of modernish 90s. This was our early 90s album, came out in 1990. And then it was just very saxophone, keyboard, guitar oriented, like modernish kind of. They drew on like some Japanese vibes, but it was a lot of like Western vibes they had too. And Dimension, number 1, the first Dimension by Dimension, had just a lot of like baller, energetic, hype tracks. Very good, very, very good saxophone work, very energetic guitar work, super composed keyboard work. Like, out of any album I could listen to, if I had just listened to any of those like top 3, I could listen to over and over and over and over and over again. very well produced. Tomohiko Aki is also on both of these albums on bass. Yeah, go check it out. Alright, thanks guys. Take care.